What's going on, folks? It's your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag, swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local YouTube room near you. And today I do indeed want to get to our YouTube live. My apologies, folks, for coming to you all a couple of days later than what I usually do for our YouTube lives. I had a couple of real life and death family emergencies over these past couple of days. And it's been one heck of a whirlwind. Let me just tell you that right now. So I definitely appreciate your patience with me. I do want to actually pause and take a little bit of time to kind of unpack or excuse me, to rewind and to unpack what today's YouTube live is going to actually be focused on and how it relates to your assignments, your persuasive arguments that are due tomorrow. All right. So if you all are coming to me while watching the recording of this video, hopefully you all actually receive this in time. I will actually end up giving you all a day, an extension by 1 day. So if you submit your persuasive arguments by tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, July 12th, by the original due date, that's great. Excellent job. You'll receive a couple of points extra credit, 2 points extra credit, okay? Which certainly can make all the difference in the world for you all. If you submit it by Monday, July 13th, I won't take any points off, okay? And that's just so that way we can kind of just keep things, that's really kind of my gift to you all. My apologies for actually coming to our YouTube live a couple of days late. So you can kind of sort of think of it as you're getting a point for each day that we missed, okay? If you submit your essays on time, all right? And if you don't, that's okay. You have still 1 day, an extra day to actually submit your essays, and that's perfectly fine. You will not be penalized, okay? So without further ado, let's go ahead on and let's jump right on into today's YouTube live. Now, I mentioned to you all that your writing assignment number 3, your persuasive arguments, are actually due tomorrow. Okay, that's just based on the original due date. I will be referring to it. Writing assignment number 3 is being due tomorrow. Excuse me, but with the added caveat, just know that what I said still stands about giving you all an extra day. Okay, I'm just going based off of the original due date. So the persuasive argument that's actually due tomorrow, it does indeed require a little bit of unpacking and some guidance. Okay, so if you all will, I want to take you directly to just to the breakdown of what an argument is. Okay, so let's just get right on into it. What are you doing? Okay, let me share my screen with y'all. And you all should see that I'm here in Canvas. I'm actually underneath the section 4.2 entitled The Structure of Arguments. There are 2 videos that are here. I don't want you to start here. I'm starting here because this helps me to actually get directly to the point to break down what an argument is, and also how to, it helps me to begin my explanation and also my demonstration of how to put it together. All right. You want to start at 4.1. Okay. You want to start at the beginning of this particular module. Okay. And then eventually you'll make it here once you get past 4.1 into 4.2. This is where you will see at the bottom of the structure of arguments page. Next, read and take notes on the following PowerPoint. There will be a 1-minute quiz after you finish the PowerPoint, which is the building arguments to PowerPoint. Okay, so that's what I'll be reading to you all from. Now let's start off like this. So persuasive arguments, what are arguments? Okay, so part of what we learned earlier in the module is that there's a difference between like a kind of common colloquial, kind of more general understanding of what an argument is when we think about it in the rough and tumble of everyday life. right? When we're sitting in the barber shops, when we're sitting in the beauty shops, when we're at home in front of our TVs in the living room, or when we're in the kitchen with our family members, we oftentimes see or even engage in what we might colloquially call an argument, right? That's really a kind of somewhat of a euphemism for a disagreement that occurs between at least two individuals. It could be more. Certainly, it is more in my house, especially when we're sitting at the kitchen table discussing the latest issues. Right, but when we're talking about this within a different context, not the home context, right? Not even necessarily the public context of the barbershop and the beauty shop, but when we're talking about an argument within the context of academia, in college, in the classroom, okay, arguments actually take on a much different character and even hue. All right. First and foremost, an argument within an academic context is not a verbal fight, okay, as it may actually pop up or show up or kind of pretend to be in beauty shops, barbershops, or even like at the family kitchen table. All right. It is not a verbal fight, right? Also, too, an argument is not a pro con debate. Okay. I know that many of you learned in high school that you want to explore both sides and that an argument helps you to figure out which one which what your stance is. Are you for or are you against a particular issue? I don't know where that voice came from. I didn't even have any teachers who actually spoke to me like that. I just kind of made that up. I'm sorry, but it's say it. Let's say that it's actually the voice of slight, somewhat disdain, but certain fatigue, okay, at the way in which argument is traditionally taught in the K through 12 system. All right. And this also too includes my own teachers. All right. I did have teachers who actually presented an argument as though it was a pro or con debate. And it was not until I actually got well within my college years, really well within my English major pathway, that I began to really unlearn a lot of the things that I had got first introduced to from high school and a lot of the habits that I had built up until that point. That an argument is not a pro or con debate. It wasn't until I was well through my English major that I began to actually discover that for myself, and really through very constant, rigorous, and sometimes kind of jarring back and forths between myself and my college professor. All right. So those are a couple of things that arguments are not. Okay. Now let's kind of take it. I know that we kind of discussed it a little bit from the critical side, from the negative side, from the doubting side, but let's actually kind of engage with this question of what are arguments from the more positive and the more generative, the believing side. Okay. So arguments ask at least two questions. On the one hand, an argument may actually ask, how does X affect people in Y? Right? It could be, how does change affect people in a society? How does the introduction of more parking spaces affect students in college, right? Or it could actually be, how do people or even a person, right, affect a particular kind of change in a society, right? So instead of asking the kind of more esoteric, kind of abstract issue-based question, in the form of, how does X change, right? Some kind of change affect people, right? We could also think about arguments as being invested in this question of, well, how do people affect a particular kind of change within a given context? Okay, right now, the difference between the two, both are very valid. Both are equally valid within the context of academic arguments in terms of providing a conceptual, right, an idea of what arguments do. Okay. Um, However, suffice it to say, a formal definition, not just a conceptual kind of idea of what arguments do, right, but rather a more formal definition of an argument looks more like this. An argument is defined as a way of communicating to others to change their minds and actions through the presentation of these three things. This here is the most important thing that most people do not get, especially my first year student writers, especially my freshman composition writers. Most of them do not get this the first time that they're encountered with an academic argument. It's a way of communicating to others to change their minds and actions, right? Their minds, that is to say, the way that they, not just the way that they think, but the way that they see, the way that they view, the way that they perceive an issue. And more importantly, the way that they perceive what should be done about an issue. And to this extent, it helps us to get into the second adjective, right? Excuse me, sorry, the second direct object. So a way to change their minds and actions, okay? The goal of an argument is really to change the way that people see a particular issue so that they can act in a way that's different or in a way that expands beyond the confines of their usual behavior. Okay. So it's a way to get people to change their behavior, right? Either by having them start something new or by having them shift what they're already doing, right? But how? How do we get people to change their perceptions, or how do we get people to change their actions? This is where the concept that we learned from our last unit from last week, rhetorical analysis, specifically the concept of rhetoric, comes into play. You see, to answer the question of how do we get others to change their minds and actions, rhetoric helps us to explain this. Rhetoric also helps to give us the tools to enable us to do this. We change the minds and actions of others through the presentation of persuasive appeals, ethos, logos, pathos, especially evidence, logic, and good reasons. Now, all of this, right? Evidence, logic, and good reasons. These are three distinct types of things that fall under the larger category of logos. Okay. Logos is not simply logic. Logos refers to a particular kind of rationale or a framework in which you can organize and structure evidence and the way in which it's presented to your audience. That is what logos is by definition from Aristotle. Okay. Now, what do we put in this frame? Evidence, supporting details, good reasons, and we have to organize it in such a way that those reasons, that evidence, and those supporting details are presented to our audience in a very logical manner, right? Logical manner, quite simply meaning a sequential, ordered, and orderly way, okay? Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into this definition of argument. Are you with me on this one? Do you got it? Okay. Hopefully you got it. If you don't, pause, go back, and go directly to our building arguments PowerPoint, or you can go directly back to our chapter 15 on 4.1, the opening post on 4.1 in our modules. You'll be presented with a that says writing arguments, or WA chapter 15. Specifically, actually, I'm sorry, not on the first post on 4.1, but actually it's on the post, it's under 4.1, but it's specifically the post on building thesis statements. Okay. Go to that particular post, that page, and you will see a link to writing arguments. It's actually a chapter textbook. It's actually chapter, I believe it's either chapter 3 or chapter 8. And in that, it will show you the core steps and definitions, as well as the components, the actual textbook itself, for how to put together a persuasive argument. Okay. It'll also define what a persuasive argument is. So stop if you don't get it, go back and read that chapter. Okay. If you've already read that chapter, then let's proceed. Okay. So let's dive deeper into this definition of what an argument is. So When we're talking about the presentation of persuasive appeals, well, what do we mean exactly by persuasive, right? What do we mean by persuasion? In order to kind of unpack more fully what we mean by persuasion, we'll have to go directly to Aristotle's concept of persuasion in order to help us to understand it deeper. Persuasion refers to the means, right? That is to say, in other words, right? By what manner of tools, by what manner of techniques does a speaker or a writer make their argument effective? In other words, what tools does a speaker or writer use in order to change the perception of their audience? You see, persuasion specifically deals with ethos, logos, and pathos, at least according to Aristotle, right? And part of what I want to highlight for you all, and I'm mentioning Aristotle and not diving too deep because he actually comes up, and he came up in last week's learning module, in course module 3.0. So you all should have been introduced to the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, specifically with Aristotle actually being the inventor, or rather the person who was credited with collecting the ideas and organizing the ideas around persuasive techniques in ancient Greece. Okay, so I'm just kind of moving right on through that, not spending too much time explaining who Aristotle is because we've already learned that. Okay, and again, if you need to go back, pause the tape, go back. All right. So ethos, logos, and pathos refer to specifically the means by which a writer or a speaker establishes their credibility for ethos, right? Here represented by a person who's a college graduate, right? Kind of floating, surfing in the air on a diploma, right? Now think about this, right? When it comes to ethos, ethos does not just quite simply mean credibility, right? Ethos means that you have established a familiarity with your audience by presenting yourself as somebody who is knowledgeable, someone who understands the form and the conventions of a particular genre if you're writing, right? Or if you're speaking, somebody who understands the audience and the context that they're actually in, right? And it's also somebody who presents themselves as trustworthy, okay? Logos, on the other hand, refers to, again, as I mentioned earlier, right, the means by which the writer makes their argument appear in the means by which a writer or a speaker makes their argument organized and makes sense, right? The way that they frame their argument, okay? The way that they organize and arrange their ideas, the sequence in which they actually present the information. It also, too, can refer to the presentation of evidence, specifically supporting details like quotes, like facts, statistics, anecdotes, okay, definitions, historical analogies, right? These are all kinds or types of logos that we learned about from module 3.0, right? From the Aristotelian appeals chart, when it breaks down the different types of logos that we could use in order to inform or in order to persuade our readers, okay? Right, and here we see that represented by the chess pieces, right? This here refers to the logical moves that a speaker makes in order to present their argument effectively. And then lastly, but not leastly, my little crying buddy right here. Pathos doesn't always have to deal with sadness, right? Or anger or violence in some sort of type of way. Pathos can actually deal with the capacity that a writer has to, through the use of language, to appeal to the heartstrings of their audience, right? There are a variety of different ways in which an author can actually present or pull at the heartstrings of their audience. They could use figurative language just like how we learned and how we discovered from the narrative structure PowerPoint in course module 2.0 when we were conducting or writing our critical memoirs, right? The presentation of the use of imagery, figurative language, voice, right? Passive and active voice, um, um, subject matter, right? These are all like the 5 keys to voice that we went over from the narrative PowerPoint structure that a writer can use in order to appeal to the reader's heartstrings, in order to feel emotionally, in order to get your audience to feel emotionally connected with you. Now, if as you're writing, and I'm just going to kind of focus on or cover this from the writerly standpoint, but if you take a look here at these examples, right? So this example over here to the left shows an advertisement, and the advertisement itself, because it uses images and texts, it actually uses more than just a couple of images here, right? And a couple of images there, and a couple of shots of the product, right? There's a lot more going on here, right? Specifically with the font size and color, right? So for example, if I'm putting together an advertisement, right, which is not what you're doing, but I'm just using this as an example. If I'm using a print advertisement and I want to actually appeal to my readers' sense of emotion, right? If I want to incorporate some pathetic appeals, right, some pathos appeals, well, then I'm going to use images that speak to my readers or my audience's desires. And I'm going to use language that I want to stand out to them. I'm going to actually use certain colors. I'm going to also to change the size of those colors. So you change the size of that font, right? And put it in certain colors so that way it stands out and it jumps out. It reaches out to my audience. Okay. Just to give you an example, here's some more examples of a variety of different kinds of or forms of what we call persuasive writing. Okay. On the one hand, we have advertisements, we have editorials, speeches, propagandas, propaganda, reviews, blogs, and even persuasive essays, which is what we're going to actually write. Just kind of give you an example, right? I actually talked a little bit about print advertisement just above. So just to kind of extend the metaphor a little bit more, right? Another form of persuasive writing can refer to advertisements, which try to convince you to act specifically in terms of consumption, right? In terms of buying something, right? Or to get you to think differently about a particular kind of product, right? So they always get you to try to act by buying, right? Or act by changing the way that you think about something. Similarly, but also in a completely different vein, editorials seek to persuade their readers specifically about current issues, and they typically appear in newspapers or magazines. Sometimes, at least now within our modern social media context, we'll see a lot more news broadcasters or even news talk shows, or even kind of like political satire shows mostly, which function as types or a kind of editorial, right? Similarly, we also have persuasive speeches, right, in which you have an individual, right, like Martin Luther King, or even like a Jay-Z or a Beyonce, right, or even like, say, for example, like your boss, right? Somebody who tries to present a set of information, right, or a set of data, set of details to their audience, so that way they could try to get them to either get on board with a particular strategy or to motivate them to become more productive. Or in the case of, right, Martin Luther King, somebody who's trying to motivate and persuade millions of Americans to change the way that they think and their actions, particularly as it pertains to issues of race, racism, and racial dynamics. Okay. You also have propaganda, you have blogs or reviews, right? Blogs are very, very popular today. And then lastly, but not leastly, persuasive essays. Okay. So let's dive right on into it. What makes persuasive essays unique and different from all those other forms that I just went over? Well, persuasive essays use specifically logical reasons, ethical and emotional appeals, um, in order to convince readers to join the writer in a certain point of view and also in a certain set of actions, right? Now, in order to understand at a more effective level, just really let's get down into like the minutia of it. How do you begin an argument, or how do arguments begin? Well, really, all arguments begin from a central premise, a problem, right? A specific and well defined social problem, right? Oftentimes, these problems are social in nature, right? Meaning that these are problems or issues that affect people on a wide scale social level, right? That affect not just one or two people, that affect not just, you and your mom, right? But issues that affect people on a wide scale throughout your community, either at home or at school, right? These kind of issues are issues that are what we would call large scale, right? Now, they oftentimes can even be even political issues, right? So things like, take for example, um, immigration, right? Immigration is a major issue that affects people on a wide scale social level, whether you are indeed somebody who has gone through the legal process, right, to establish citizenship, whether you are somebody who has acquired citizenship through temporary protected status, or whether you've acquired citizenship, or whether you are in the process of acquiring citizenship, right, and have not yet done it, but have legal resident status, right? Immigration immigration enforcement has become a major issue, especially for members of those three groups that I just kind of highlighted right now, and even for folks who um, consider themselves and were indeed born in the states in the U.S., North America, the United States in particular. Uh, Even if you were born in the United States, immigration is still an issue, right? Immigration enforcement, that is, right? When they roll tanks into your city, right? When cops are indiscriminately stopping everybody who they suspect or who they see as possibly being an immigrant, right? Just quite simply based off of the look, based off of their facial features, based off of their hair, based off of their skin, based off of their gender, either assigned or chosen, right? All arguments start from the recognition and the definition, right? The explaining of a clear problem that is affecting people on a wide scale social level. And to this end, arguments start by establishing a claim, an arguable claim, which goes back to our thesis statement. Let me say it like this. If you don't have an issue, I want you to repeat after me. If you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument. If you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument. All right? Meaning that if in your introduction you do not clearly define the problem, okay, and I read your paper and I'm looking for, okay, well, what's the social issue? You have no argument. There is no argument that could be persuasive enough if you have not defined what the specific social issue is, right? Why? Well, because good arguments respond to specific social problems. There is a mutually constitutive relationship between the problem and an argument, right? So good arguments always respond to specific social problems. And the response to the social problem must be justified through the presentation of rational facts, proof, evidence, statistics, data. In other words, your thesis statement, which is the combination of an arguable claim and three logical reasons, right? those two parts right there, the combination of an arguable claim and three logical reasons, right? Those two components need to come together in one sentence, not two, right? In order to respond to a specific social problem. If you're able to do that, if you're able to compose a thesis statement, right, that is the combination of an arguable claim and three logical reasons, then your essay will begin to develop like this. Here's what we call the classical structure of an argument. So this here is a basic generic structure that you're going to find in just about every single composition or writing class that you'll go to all across the entire nation. Okay. Every single essay starts off with, a persuasive essay starts off with an introduction to the problem. Okay. Not an introduction to the topic, not an introduction to the history of the idea or of the subject matter, right? You want to introduce, that is to say, set up your reader's understanding by introducing them to the problem, right? Next, you want to move on into, after you establish your intro, and your last sentence in the intro should be your thesis statement, right? After you present your thesis statement, which is the combination of your arguable claim and three logical reasons, then you move on into discussing the background or the historical context out of which the social problem emerged, right? Once you give us the history and the background on the problem itself and how things got to be this way, tell us the whole story for how things got to be up to the present point, okay? Then you can go directly back to your three logical reasons from your thesis statement, and you can begin to develop your reasons, your logical reasons, with evidence, okay? Finally, the last part of this essay is just your conclusion. Now, interestingly enough, actually, I'm sorry, there's one more part that I want to actually address here that's under your reasons and evidence section. This particular section should also house your the opposition, right, or the various sides, points of views, or arguments that disagree with your own or that offer an alternative approach or response to addressing the issue. That's also what you're going to cover here in the reasons and evidence section. And the reason why you don't see it here is because it's actually folded, it's enveloped into the reasons and evidence section, okay? So this should be like a paragraph unto itself, or you could actually weave it into the actual paragraph that you look to compose. So let's dive right on into, and we'll come back to the conclusion in just a second. Let's dive right on into the introduction. So this is like what the intro does, right? These are the things, the moves that the introduction actually makes. This is not necessarily the order or structure that you want to follow. I'll talk with you all about the order and structure that you should follow in just a second. But an introduction for a persuasive argument always starts off with a central idea, okay? Now, the central idea is your title. I cannot stress this enough. I have seen way too many of you all, okay, my students, this very summer session, not include a title. Or what I've seen most times, is that they use the writing assignment title, writing assignment number 3, persuasive essay, as their title. That is not a title. That is the title of the assignment. That's not your title. You have to come up with an original title that communicates the central idea of your entire argument, okay? That is your job. You will start to lose points now on that. I've already made the point very, very clear if you go back and you look at the comments on your essays, okay? What's most important in the introduction, however, is that this is where you set up your essay by framing the topic and the evidence. Usually there's what Aristotle used to actually teach back in the day, and also too, moving beyond even the ancient Greeks on into Roman orators and rhetoricians. What they used to specifically teach, particularly Quintilian and also Cicero, what they used to teach is that you want to start by grabbing your audience's attention. Stop me if you've ever heard this before. You need a hook. No, my high school teacher was the only one who kept repeating that to me. Here's the problem with that. I, I never had a high school teacher who could explain to me how to do it. They always just kind of left it up to us and left it up to our interpretation for how to actually do it. And I was never taught how to do it until I realized one thing. You don't need a hook. As a matter of fact, don't use one in my class, because hooks are oftentimes, if they are taught to young folks, if they are taught to people who are in high school or even in other classes, then they're taught as a form and a matter of cliche. Do not use cliches in my papers. Do not. Cliches are lazy. Cliches do not do the work, nor do they replace the work that is required in order for you as a writer to establish an emotional connection with your audience. That's why I teach rhetoric, to highlight and present to you all the tools that you'll need in order to execute your writing, right? You don't need a hook when you can establish an emotional or an intellectual connection with your audience. How do you do that, Professor Cag? You can establish an emotional connection with your audience by telling them a very brief, very, very brief, like 3 to 4 sentences, max 5, a very brief story of either your own experience or someone else's experience with the problem. Tell someone else's story. Stories help to establish an emotional connection between humans. That works much better than a hook. Tell your story briefly, 3 to 4 sentences, 5 max. Okay? That is how you not only grab the reader's attention, but you actually grab the reader's heart. Or you can actually establish a connection that's logical and intellectual with your readers, right? By informing them of the current situation and explaining the current situation through the presentation of facts, statistics, proof, and data. Not quotes. You'll have to cite your your statistics, proof, and data. You'll have to cite that, yes. But don't give me a quote. That's also another hook that high school teachers will actually teach. Do not do that. Do not. I will draw a line right through that paper and say, rewrite the entire introduction. If that occurs, do not do that. Why? Because your quotes are supporting details that should come in the evidence section of your essay, in the reasons and evidence section of your essay. Don't start off your paper with a quote. It's not catchy. It's not pithy. It's not cool. It's not the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do is to actually demonstrate your knowledge, and therefore to present facts, statistics, proof, and information to your readers, thereby helping to establish your ethos. You quoting somebody else does not prove your ethos. It does not demonstrate your ethos. It doesn't show that you're knowledgeable. Okay. So avoid cliches at all costs. Next, you want to actually provide a little bit of explanation about the issue itself. And not really so much like the history or the background about the issue, as much as you want to. This here is particularly what Aristotle used to actually teach, right? What Cicero and Quintilian used to actually teach, right? It's called the narratio. What you want to actually focus on here is explaining, right, what the problem is. State what the problem is, right? Either in the form of a problem statement or in the form of a research question. And then explain why so what and who cares, right? Like, that is to say, what's the purpose of us addressing this issue and who's going to be affected by it? Then you can present to us, your readers, with your response to this problem. You see, that is how you set up an introduction. Want to see how to do it? All right, let's take a look. I'm going to switch my share screen. Let me show you how to do it. Let's see. Okay, now I hope that you all can actually see this. Okay, so these here are actually kind of from some of my class notes. These are the notes that I actually take in preparation for all of my classes. So, as you can see here, right, we define an argument as a way of persuading others to change their minds and actions, right? Persuasion refers to the means by which a speaker or writer makes the argument effectively. And then lastly, critical thinking. Now, this here is what I want to actually kind of highlight for you all. I'm going to put a pin in this. We're going to come back to critical thinking in just a second. This is what I want to highlight for you all. This actually ties, that all ties into quotes in the reasons and evidence section. That's what I want to highlight for you all. The intro. I'm going to teach you all a technique, really a strategy for how to write your intros, okay? And you don't need hooks or cliches or any of that stuff, okay? This is what I call the four-part intro scheme, okay? In other words, how to introduce the social problem. So you want to start off in 4 parts, right? This here is an introduction in 4 parts. I'm going to start off with the current situation, right? Kind of similar to Marvin Gaye, right? Y'all ever heard that song, What's Going On? Go back and listen to that song. Your moms, your dads, your aunties, your uncles, heck, maybe even your really way older brother or sister may have the song on their iTunes, right? But go back and listen to that song. You can look it up even on YouTube, right? Type in Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. Marvin Gaye in the song entitled What's Going On. He came out with that in 1971. And in just a few short, simple words on repeat, Marvin Gaye is able to paint the picture, a vivid, visceral picture for the entire world to see what's going on in the US in the 1970s. In just a few short words, he's able to actually capture the span of an entire decade to paint the picture about what's going on, to show his readers what the specific social problem is. Now, for yourself, I want you to think about that just as a kind of analogy, okay? Right? As a kind of analogy for the way that you're going to show what's going on. So you can show what's going on, as I mentioned, right, through the presentation of your story or your experiences, or the experiences of somebody that you know. You can also show what's going on. That's what we call through the use of personal anecdotes. You can also show what's going on through the presentation of facts, evidence, statistics, and data, right? But you want to do it in such a way that helps to demonstrate, that paints the picture of the specific social problem. Take, for example, read this right along with me. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, from 1990 to 2000, the cost of college tuition, room and board, increased approximately 11%. That is from approximately 10,000 to 13,000. And in 2001, right, to 2010 to 2011 academic school year, approximately 42%. So from the previous 10,000 to 18,000 per year, right? Notice how I'm using statistics. See, now here's the only difference here, right? And some of you may actually kind of be like, well, Cag, you didn't cite it. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. This is what you call, right, in line with the text citation right here. If you call it out in line with the text itself, then you don't necessarily need to include it, what we call an in-text citation at the end of the sentence, right? But if I didn't include this line right here, right, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, if I just said, From 1990 to 2000, the cost of college tuition, room and board increased approximately 11%, and in 2000 to 2010, approximately 42%. Right? Then I would have to cite Encyclopedia Britannica, right, at the end, right there. Okay, but that's an example of how you can paint the current illustration, paint the current situation, excuse me, of what's going on with the state of college tuition. Okay. Next, the next thing that you want to do, as I mentioned earlier, is present the problem, right? Either introduce the research question or provide us with a problem statement, right? So the research question is what you want to actually kind of focus on. This is not necessarily something that I came up with off the top of my head. However, let's take a look at it. Considering the drastic rise in the cost of college tuition over the past 20 years, notice how I'm pivoting off of the timeline that I just presented in the sentence that came before it. So from 1990 all the way to 2010, right? That's 20 years. Many young people are wondering if the cost of college is even worth it, right? So here we can see clearly what the issue is. Is college even worth it, right? Now, if I wanted to flip it into a statement and not ask a question, then I could just quite simply rearrange the sentence, rearrange what I have here from most people are taught that after high school, you go to college. However, considering the drastic rise in the cost of college tuition over the past 20 years, many young people have determined that college is not worth it, right? So it's just a way to convert the question into a statement, right? Next, the third most important component of this four-part introduction scheme is the significance of the problem, right? That is to say, you, in this section, in sentence number 3, this is the third sentence, okay, of the intro, the four-part intro scheme. In this sentence, you want to imagine that your readers are asking you, okay, so what? So what about this problem? Is college even worth it? Right? Who cares? You want to imagine that they're asking you these two questions right here. Really, what they're asking you is, what's the purpose of introducing a solution to this problem? Like, why does this even matter? Right? More importantly, for whom does it even matter? Okay? That's what those two questions are. That's the underlying meaning that lies hidden beneath these two questions. So here's our response. Not our response to the problem, but rather our response to these two specific questions in an effort to demonstrate the significance of the problem. However, those who attain college degrees, notice how I'm highlighting the audience, right? Who I'm writing to. Those folks who attain college degrees develop better professional skills, have more opportunities for career advancement, and develop a stronger social network. While many potential college students may have street smarts, attending college may help them to become more well-rounded individuals by developing book smarts, right? So there, I've already addressed the purpose, right? Or the so what, and also who cares, right? By highlighting that while many potential college students who may have street smarts, right? That helps to address the purpose right here, right? While you may have street smarts, right? The goal, right? The purpose of even addressing this is because college helps people to become more well-rounded individuals by helping them to match and grow equally their street smarts with the book smarts, right? That's the purpose of addressing this issue, right? At least on the one hand. I've also addressed the purpose of addressing this issue right here too as well, because college students develop better professional skills. They have more opportunities for career advancement, and they also develop stronger social networks, right, when you go to college. Okay. So notice how I've addressed the purpose in multiple areas, at least across two sentences. Now, this could be one sentence or it could be two, but you want it to be brief. That's the point. Okay. Next, I've already addressed, at least within the first couple of words, my who, right? Who cares? Well, college students care. And that's exactly who I would be writing to in an essay like this. Now, part number 4. This here's the most important part, which dovetails back with the earlier portion of 4.1, the thesis statement, how to build a thesis statement. You see, a thesis statement is just quite simply a one sentence response to the problem. So here we can see our one sentence response to the problem is right here. It's not multiple sentences. It's not 4 or 5 sentences, right? It's not broken up across the various periods. No. One sentence response, okay? College tuition. Notice how I'm actually breaking this down. A thesis statement is composed of 2 parts, right? The first part is the arguable claim. The second part are the 3 logical reasons. So you can see here, right? I've color coded and highlighted each particular part. Our arguable claim, college tuition should be free to students. Let me stop right there. How do you know if you've established an arguable claim? Look at the question, right? Considering the drastic rise in the cost of college tuition over the past 20 years, many young people are wondering if the cost of college is even worth it, right? So is the cost of college even worth it, right? I'm implying, yes, the cost of college is worth it. And in fact, really, college tuition should be free. College tuition should be free to college students. It's free for high school students already, right? So college tuition should be free to students. That's my one sentence response to that question, right? Is college even worth it? There's an implied yes. I'm not going to state yes. My readers will know that I'm referring to, obviously, right? It's yes. And not only am I saying yes, but I'm actually taking it a step further, right, to advance my position. College tuition should be free to students, right? Now, after I've made my arguable claim, would everybody agree with that? Right? Not you individually, right? But do you think everybody in the entire country would agree that college tuition should be free? Hmm. If you answered no, you're right. Not everybody would agree. There are a lot of people who would wholesalely disagree that college, you need to pay for college. And in fact, college should be actually exclusively provided for those people who can pay for it, right? But needless to say, those are my ops, okay? So I can address them later on in the essay. College tuition should be free for students. Why? Notice how I'm using a because clause here in order to join my arguable claim with my 1, 2, 3 logical reasons. Through the use of this word because, I can create a bridge, right? So provide your arguable claim, introduce the because clause, and then get into your first logical reason. Logical reason number 1, employers still require college degrees, believe it or not. Employers still require college degrees, all right? 2, students learn and develop interpersonal skills. 3, graduates on average remain more employed than their high school graduate and college incomplete counterparts, right? So if you only graduated high school And if you only completed some college but didn't get a degree or a certificate, right? Those folks who do have their degrees, especially their bachelor's, right, end up staying in their jobs in larger number. Okay. Those are the three logical reasons. Now, here's my goal. I have to actually research this information. I have to make sure that I'm not just stating this just because it's how I feel. I'm not giving my opinion on this, folks. As a matter of fact, do not give me your opinion. If you do not have statistics and facts to back this up, do not include it, rethink it, and go find you some facts and statistics to back this up. Because what you're going to do is, when you engage in research, facts, and statistics that support your own point, right? When you find facts and stats to back up what you're saying, what you do is you build your ethos and you provide evidence for other people to go back and actually look up. When you don't, or when you're only arguing from your opinion, right? And here's how I know that you're arguing from your opinion, right? I have students who say, well, in my opinion, guess what? I don't care. I do not care about your opinion, folks. That's not what this essay here is. It's not me individually, not that I don't care personally about y'all opinion, right? But right, this assignment does not care about your opinion. I'm sorry. This assignment does not care about your opinion. This assignment is an academic argument, meaning that it is based on the presentation of rational proof, facts, statistics, and data. If you cannot prove it, do not include it. If you do not cite it, do not include it. You will lose points. Cite the information, okay? Next. So, excuse me, sorry, that's it. That's our 4-part introduction. So hopefully that was somewhat informative, folks. I'm going to end it right here and just kind of give you all a pause for the cause. There is another video that I will make a little bit later on. I don't want this one here to actually expand too long, but I do want you all to actually know how to start, at least get started with your thesis statements, or excuse me, with your persuasive arguments, okay? It's vitally important, folks. All right. This is your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag signing off. Enjoy. Peace.